It is a great privilege to be talking to Professor Tim Noakes today about work, life, and of course, nutrition. So thank you very much for giving us some of your time today. We know you've been through a roller coaster ride and it's just an absolute honor to be able to speak to you. We come from a platform called Heavy Chef, which consists of around 25,000 entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and graduates. So in a nutshell, very, very busy people. Now, entrepreneurs are renowned to have extremely poor eating habits. TV dinners, takeaways, high sugar food that gives them that immediate energy boost. So with that in mind, we want to know about how to preserve an entrepreneur's mental and physical well-being. Sure. In your opinion, how do we go about shifting these ingrained behavior patterns?
First, you learn to cook, and if you can't cook yourself, you find a cook who's going to cook your food for you. That's the key. You have to get off processed foods and onto what we call real foods. It's what your grandparents and great-grandparents ate. And they were healthy and thin, and they didn't have obesity and diabetes and cancer and dementia. And I mention all those four because they're all linked directly to what you eat. Sure. And the entrepreneur may think that he's getting away with it. He's lean or she's lean. And they've got lots of energy, but please understand that we understand now that the condition of insulin resistance is the most widespread condition on the globe. And we all have it to differing degrees. And if we eat high carbohydrate diets for life, we ultimately end up with diabetes, obesity, cancer, dementia. So if you don't want to become demented at 65, you've got to act now. Sure. And the way you do it is by avoiding processed foods and eating the real foods that your great-grandparents ate.
So you're advocating we cook on a day-to-day basis 3 meals a day?
No, 1 meal a day. Okay, so the idea that you must eat 6 meals a day is because that is addictive eating, as we'll discuss. Sure. You only need to eat once a day, a big meal, and the rest you can snack. And we tend to encourage people to eat during an 8-hour period and then to fast for the next 16 hours. Sure. So you have one big meal during that 8 hours, and then you may eat other stuff, but as long as it's real food, sure. But then you fast for the next 16 hours.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. It appears that the world is coming around to the evidence that fat is actually good for you. The first mainstream stake that was placed in the ground was when Time magazine published the cover featuring butter in 2011. Yeah. Why, in your opinion, are the South African authorities taking such a long time to come around to this fat versus carbohydrate debate?
Because the government's controlled by industry, then the medical profession is controlled by industry. So if you want to control the industry or the scientific opinion, you go to the source. And the source is the professor of medicine and the professor of cardiology and the professor of diabetes or endocrinology. And you make sure they buy into this model, the old model that low fat is what you want to eat. Now the low fat theory comes along in the 1970s, and we tell people to start eating more grains, cereals and grains, and make them the basis for your foods. So the South African dietary guidelines are make starch the main component of all your meals. That's the South African guidelines. There never was any scientific evidence for that. Sure. What we did, we took the fat out the diet, and when you take fat out the diet, the food tastes terrible. So they add an addictive substance called sugar. Sugar is the biggest drug. It is more powerful than cocaine and heroin, etc. And industry realized that if they put more sugar in, they'll addict more people to eat more and more of this processed food. Sure. And then they got lots of money, and they use that money wisely. And they spend that money by controlling the opinion, the key opinion leaders. And that's what they do. And so this government won't take on the food industry because there's too much money involved and too many people have been bought out. And the irony, what I've realized from my own trial and subsequent events, was that every medical school in South Africa has a choice. It either teaches nutrition as the basis for ill health, sure. which destroys the faculty because the faculty is so dependent on the pharmaceutical industry and big food to fund it. So they've got to say, do we save South Africa and destroy the faculty? Sure. Or do we save the faculty and destroy South Africa? And at the moment, everyone says, we'll destroy South Africa and we'll pretend we were doing the right stuff.
Very, very sad. Anyway, and was it, I mean, this is off the topic, was it Mr. Ansel Keys?
Yeah, it was Dr. Ansel Keys. He had a vision from God, and God told him that saturated fat causes heart disease. Not quite, but he had this vision.
Yes.
And then he decided that saturated fat causes heart disease.
Yeah.
He promoted that idea, and in 1961, So Keyes had this vision that saturated fat causes heart disease, and he set out to prove it. And he set up experiments that would only prove what he said. He manipulated the information, so he only looked at countries where he knew the results would be.
This was the 7-country study.
That's correct. Sure. And he didn't look at the 22 countries that were available, and he chose countries, a whole bunch of countries which had low fat intakes and low rates of heart disease. And he didn't look at countries where they had high fat intakes and low rates of heart disease. Sure. He excluded them, like Switzerland and France. He actively excluded them. Had he included them, he wouldn't have come to the same conclusion.
Sure.
What happened next was 1961. The American Heart Association was funded by the vegetable oil industry. They came along and said, okay, saturated fat's bad, here's something that'll make it better, vegetable oils. Sure. They gave them $2 million, and the American Heart Association suddenly was on board with this dangers of saturated fat.
Sure.
Ancel Keys himself initiated a study in 1968, one of the best studies ever, because he changed the diet of a population in a mental homes in Minnesota. Yes. And he changed the diet of half, and the other half he continued to eat the same diet. They continued to eat their saturated fat. This group ate polyunsaturated vegetable oils.
Sure.
And at the end of the trial, there was no difference. In fact, the people eating the polyunsaturated fats, if they were over 65, they did worse.
Okay.
He buried the data. He buried the data. They were only they were recovered 4 years ago, and they showed that the group eating the polyunsaturated fats did worse. And if that had come out in 1974, they couldn't have changed the guidelines to say we must eat polyunsaturated fats.
Sure. I think the question that comes to mind is, at what point did maize meal become South Africa's staple food, and why did this come about?
Yeah. So maize was introduced along the east coast of South Africa in the 1500s by the Portuguese. Sure. And the local Xhosa and Zulu farmers used it, but it was never a staple diet. Sure. What next happened was they discover diamonds and gold in South Africa, and they come to the Transvaal, as it was then. Sure. And there's all these people and there's no food. So they imported maize from Lesotho. And Lesotho farmers realized actually they could make more money by being miners, so that suddenly the production went down. And then the South African government realized they were making so much money from mining, why don't they invest that in the farming community? And they produced the maize belt. And that becomes it. So in 1920 about, maize becomes the staple diet in South Africa. And currently it provides 40% of our calories. And we know that those are empty calories. It's purely carbohydrate. Sure. And no human needs carbohydrate. We've got this fabulous liver that produces all the glucose, all the carbohydrate you need.
Sure.
So you don't need external carbohydrate. And what people never tell you, and they never tell the entrepreneurs this, that carbohydrates do one thing. They produce energy and make you fat. But they do another thing. They make you hungry. And if you eat carbohydrates, you are perpetually hungry. So I can guarantee this is the typical day of the entrepreneur. Up in the morning, it's too much rush, so gets out the cornflakes or the muesli.
Future Life is another one.
A Future Life, and which is full of polyunsaturated fats, which are not the right ones, the vegetable oils, and sugar, of course. So that's it, and then we add the sugar because it tastes like rubbish, so you add sugar, and then you have the skim milk because you mustn't have any fat, the orange juice, and what that does is spikes your glucose and spikes your insulin, and 3 hours later, you're hungry. Whereas I get up in the morning, and if I have breakfast, I eat eggs and bacon until I cannot move, and I don't eat again for another 12 hours. And that's how it should be. Sure. So you eat at home, and you don't eat these processed foods. So if you're eating that muesli and milk, skim milk and sugar, and bananas are so healthy, surely, Dr. Noakes. And they just spike your glucose, and you will be hungry in 3 hours' time. And you're at work, what are you going to do? You're going to eat some chips or whatever, some other rubbish that is not food.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's the key. Eat high fat, high protein, which your body needs. You know, you don't build muscle from carbohydrates, you build it from protein. Guess what you require for your brain? The brain is 50% fat. If you don't want to get dementia, you better feed your brain with fat and cholesterol.
Sure. So I think that brings me to the next question, which is, can we debunk the myths around go out there and eat as much fat as possible? Is there good fat and is there bad fat, and how do we differentiate between the two?
Okay, so the only bad fats are the fats that the Heart Foundation tells you to eat. They're the ones produced by Unilever. Okay. The polyunsaturated fats, which they extract from vegetable oils in this whole chemical process. and they have to deodorize it and so on. It's like plastic, and then they have to try and make it edible. And that becomes margarine or shortening and vegetable oils. And those are highly toxic. We're beginning to realize that they are one of the key drivers of the cancer, obesity, diabetes epidemic, is these vegetable oils. And their consumption since the 1920s has just gone like this. It's the one food stuff that has really gone like that. Sugar has also gone up, but nothing has increased like polyunsaturated fats. So you incorporate those polyunsaturated fats into your cells, and they're highly inflammatory, and then they cause problems. You want saturated fat to fill your cells.
Sure. Talking about...
So to answer your question, no vegetable oils. All animal fats are healthy.
Sure.
And the other point is that all fats contain three types of fats. Saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and monounsaturated fats. Every fat in creation includes all three fats. You cannot have a saturated fat-free diet. It doesn't exist. Because as soon as you eat fat, you're going to eat saturated fat, mono, and poly. And they just vary in amounts.
Sure.
So the healthy fats are the fats that we always ate. The lard, the butter, the fat from the animals. Those were key.
The naturally existing fats.
That's
I
correct.
hear you correctly. So talking about inflammatory, when we put out the address to our community that we're going to be working with you going forward in terms of a masterclass and an event, we had a large response, mostly positive, but also some negative comments where some people went as far as to call you a quack and an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that your nutritional beliefs elicit such an inflammatory emotional response from the public, given the growing global body of evidence in your favor?
Well, you must understand what my university did to me. They mobbed me, and they coordinated amongst doctors and colleagues throughout South Africa. There was a coordinated process of mobbing me, which means that I was declared persona non grata and publicly humiliated. And so those people are just following it. We're currently tracking. I was attacked not just publicly, but in social media. And that was a social media campaign driven by a person at the University of Cape Town. And we're tracking all the people he got involved with. And then they started saying I was anti-vax and so on, which I never was. I just said, where's the evidence that vaccination is safe, you see? But you're not allowed to ask that question.
Sure.
So, and being a quack, well, that was what they said. I'm not. I'm the most qualified nutrition scientist in South Africa that there's ever been. I'm more published in nutrition science than anyone else in South Africa. I'm an A1 rated scientist. There are not many A1 rated scientists. Means you are world leader, the world leader in your field. And so the problem was when I started saying this stuff, and because I was such a good scientist, they had to say, no, he's actually lost it. And so the campaign begins at UCT. It spreads through all the faculties of medicine throughout South Africa, and the Health Professional Council then is able to charge me. And we went to court for 28 days. It cost me 3 million rand to defend my name. Because otherwise I would have been the real quack, and I proved I'm not. I proved I'm right and they're wrong. But those people will never accept that because it conflicts with, a lot of them are vegans and a lot of them are vegetarians. And they can't accept that there is another opinion. And you must understand that the Seventh-day Adventists are the people who've driven the vegetarian plant-based diet since the 1900s. In the United States of America, they have been driving this plant-based idea, and it's just taking off. So I will guarantee you the people that tell you you're a quack are vegetarians or vegans, and they have a religious connotation or belief in diet. It has got nothing to do with fact.
Sure. I was just about to ask you what's at stake in the Health Professionals Council of South Africa actually coming forward and admitting that it can potentially be good for you to eat fat. What is at stake for them?
Well, you see, the problem in medicine is we've gone down the wrong road. Since the Flexner Report in the United States in 1912, which closed down all medical schools in the United States, except those that use pharmaceutical products. And who is it? Rockefeller was the person who initiated the Flexner Report, and Rockefeller was the oil magnate. And he wanted his oils to be produced into pharmaceutical products. And they closed down everything, homeopathy, etc., acupuncture, everything, except allopathic medicine, which was prescribing drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. Now what's happened is, we've now reached the point where we are trying to treat a nutritional disease with pharmaceutical agents.
Sure.
And because 85% of chronic disease today is caused by nutrition, you cannot reverse it with a pharmaceutical agent. We're not dying because we've got too little of these particular chemicals, the patented chemicals. We're not dying from that. We're dying because we're insulin resistant and we're eating high carbohydrate diets.
Sure.
Now, if that's 85% of medicine can be cured by a change in diet, that means the pharmaceutical industry has got no relevance anymore. But the pharmaceutical industry controls the medical schools across the globe. And so that the medical schools can't teach their students the truth. So what happens? We have to educate the people, and that's what's happening through social media.
Great.
And what is going to happen in 10 years' time? If you get diabetes in 10 years' time, you won't go to your doctor because he will give you insulin, which is going to kill you in the long term. You're going to go to someone who has had diabetes, who's been treated by people like myself, and they said, just cut the carbohydrates and you'll be fine. And those will be the coaches. It'll be the people who've had the disease will be treating the patients. The patients will be treating the patients.
Sure.
So if in 10 years' time, as a medical doctor, you don't prescribe stuff that works, no one's going to come to you. And that's the one side. The other side is the only way conventional medicine will continue will be in public medicine,
sure,
where they still control everyone. And they will, so the pharmaceutical industry will continue to control public medicine, but private medicine, you either cure the patients or the patients will go elsewhere.
Do you want to tell us about your Facebook pages, the one that exists in South Africa and in Nigeria?
Yeah, there's the Banting 7-Day Meal Plan Facebook page, which started when I started the Banting idea,
Sure,
and Rita Fenter in Cape Town started it, and it's now got 1.5 million people, and they all show these fabulous pictures of people before and after losing 50, 60 kilograms, and 80% are Zulu and Xhosa-speaking South Africans. It's not people from Bishop's Court, etc. We're told that the Banting diet is expensive and the average person can't eat it. Forget it. The average South African is getting it.
A question for you is, have you come across people who've taken the little bit of truth that is in what you're teaching and putting out there and actually blown it up to suit their own needs, and in that way are actually giving the Banting diet a bad name?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and particularly women actually, think that they've now got the right to eat as much as they like, and some of them eat so much fat and then they obviously put on weight and they don't lose weight. Now the problem is that we have a brain which is highly sensitive to fat and protein, and generally we become quickly satiated, but it's clear that there are some people that doesn't happen.
Sure.
And so conventionally we say that carbohydrates drive hunger and failure of satiation. So our problem is if you continue to eat carbohydrates above 50 grams a day, which is pretty little,
Sure.
and then you say, gosh, I must load up on the fat and protein, then you get into trouble. So that's the one error,
Sure,
is they don't cut the carbs enough. But the other one is they think it's free and we can eat as much as we like. And that's not true. You've still got to listen to your body, and when it tells you you're no longer hungry, you've got to stop eating.
Sure.
And I think for most of us, the reason why we're so successful on this diet is that you become satiated very quickly. And as soon as you feel satiated, you stop eating.
Sure.
And you only eat again when you're hungry.
Sure.
And you don't have time scales like, you don't have breakfast, lunch, supper. You eat when you're hungry.
Sure.
So you're quite right. A lot of people break the rules because they continue to eat 3 meals a day and they eat beyond hunger. They eat beyond satiation.
Your non-fiction books are one of the highest selling in South Africa's history. And this is arguably the greatest vindication for your views, given that most of these sales have taken place through word of mouth. Your win against the Health Professionals Council of South Africa was showcased on Netflix in The Magic Pill. Given all of your success, do you believe that this roller coaster is coming to an end?
Well, it has to, because otherwise we're going to bankrupt medical services. We simply don't have the money to cope. So we've got a diabetes epidemic, and the cost of diabetes, people don't die with diabetes. That's the problem. You live on for years. And you know that, for example, dialysis, a year's dialysis costs 1.5 million rand. That's what a year dialysis. Now, most people with diabetes, if they live long enough, they will get kidney failure and they'll have to go into dialysis. And that's the one thing. Then you get the amputations and the blindness and the dementias. So the costs are astronomical, and they're all preventable if people would just eat the right diets for their lives. So sooner or later, governments have to realize, for example, the South African government is worried about this national insurance policy or health insurance policy. It can't work because the costs are going like this, and we can't afford it. What you have to do is get people healthy. And medicine, unfortunately, is in the state where it doesn't make you healthy. You cannot get health from medicine.
Sure.
Medicine is a business that requires clients. And if you get into the medical problem, so if you come outside into medicine, they want to capture you as a patient. So I say there's only one rule in medicine. If you want to stay healthy, don't get sick. That's the key. You have to do the things that are going to keep you healthy and not get you sick, because once you're sick, you're captured and then you're in trouble. Classic example. I'll bet every entrepreneur listening to this has had their cholesterol measured. Cholesterol is utterly hopeless in telling you anything about your health. No one tells you measure your level of insulin resistance. If you give me your data on insulin resistance, I can influence your life dramatically. I can add 10 years on your life. Because if you're insulin resistant and eating a high carbohydrate diet, you are going to die 10 years younger if you continue to eat that diet. Now, I can't pick that up from cholesterol measurements, but yet the doctor will say, oh, your cholesterol is 5.00001, you're going to drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow. That is nonsense. You can't say that. And you'll be put on a statin, which has many complications. Whereas if the doctor understands, they'll say, I want to see what your level of insulin resistance is. I want to look at your diet. You've got high blood pressure. Gosh, it's because you're eating too much sugar and you've got a high carbohydrate diet. If I put you on a low carbohydrate diet, your blood pressure will normalize in 3 weeks. But they never ask, what are you eating?
In closing, if you had one line of nutritional advice to give to entrepreneurs, what would it be?
It's simple. Eat real foods.